All righty. Well, that's everyone in from Zoom, so I think we're going to get started. Hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm Emma, one of the librarians here at Rockland Public Library, and we are so thrilled to be hosting tonight's talk. Before we do get started, Zoom people in that audience, I think, if you have questions on Zoom, if you could type them into the chat throughout, and we'll address them at the end during the Q&A portion. And then audience members, you are welcome to chime in with your questions at the end as well. And I think that will do it. Yes, perfect. So I'm going to introduce tonight's speaker. Andrew Vietze is the award-winning author of more than 24 books, including Boon Island, Becoming Teddy Roosevelt, and White Pine. He is the former managing editor of Down East and now spends 6 months of each year as a ranger in the Katahdin region. And I will turn it right over to Andy. Go right ahead.
Thank you. I feel like a game show host with the mic. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. I was working down the road at Down East for about a decade and ended up as managing editor and decided that I didn't want to be a manager when I grew up. I wanted to be a writer. So I figured I could stay there and write about the interesting people of Maine, or I could go become one of the interesting people of Maine. So in 2002, I resigned and took a job as a ranger at Baxter State Park. We had done an issue, which is one of my ideas actually, about making a living in Maine, because we always heard people from away saying that we'd move to Maine in a heartbeat if we could only figure out a way to make a living there. So we had done this issue about making a living in Maine, and I went through and I made a piece about dream jobs in Maine, and the number one dream, the first one was Baxter State Park Ranger. And I wrote it myself. And so when I went to see my editor-in-chief, I walked up the stairs one day and I said, "Do you remember that piece I wrote about dream jobs? Well, I'm about to go take a dream job." And ever since I was about 5, I wanted to be a park ranger. I don't know why. I camped a lot, I hiked a lot, but there was no, when I wanted to be a firefighter, it was because of emergency and Johnny and Roy. And when I wanted to be a rock star, it was because of the monkeys. I mean, I had all these reasons. I never knew why I wanted to be a park ranger, but it was just something that I thought was really cool. You get to live in the woods in a beautiful place and have adventures. And that is how it has played out for me. So anyway, this is the book in question. I'm going to try to interface with technology, which park rangers don't do well. Okay, so has everybody in here been to Baxter Park? Yeah. So anyway, this is the place. 200 and roughly 10,000 acres now, and it's larger than about half of the national parks. Not many people know that. About 4 times the size of Acadia. So if this is Katahdin, which is obviously the focal point of Baxter Park, I started here at Katahdin Stream Campground for my first 2 seasons as a mountain ranger. And then I moved to Dacey Pond, which is over here, and which is where I still to this day remain. So 18 seasons at 18 seasons at Dacey and 2 at Katahdin Stream. Being at Dacey makes me proximate enough to 2 of the main routes up the mountain, which is the Hunt Trail or the Appalachian Trail and the A-Ball Trail. So I frequently get called to do rescues and adventures on the mountain, which is one of the cool things about being at Dacey. I can get away from all the traffic, but at the same time, get involved in all the cool stuff. So one of the things that was really neat about how the park came together is Governor Baxter, Percival Baxter, scion of a canning family empire from Portland. His dad was mayor of Portland. He was at first a representative, and then he became a governor of Maine. And during his time as governor, he wanted to build a park based around Katahdin, and was essentially laughed out of the room by a lot of the folks in the legislature. At the time, it was timberlands that were cut over, and a lot of people thought, who cares about stumps, and it looks like a moonscape. But he persisted and ended up doing it with his own fortune. In 1931, bought his first piece, which includes the mountain itself. And as you can see, he pieced it together as sort of a patchwork. The second piece was South Branch Ponds area, which was right up here, which was 8 years after the first piece. And what I always thought was fascinating was he did these pieces. He bought the third one here with the idea that one day he'll be able to make them all connect. So he had a whole lot of force. I mean, the fourth piece is down here. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So he does this sort of hopscotch pattern, putting it all together. And then when he passed in the 60s, he left a trust that has allowed us to, we're quasi-independent from the state. We're owned by the people of the state of Maine, but we take no tax dollars. Governor Baxter left a trust that allows us to run the park. And then we use camping fees and canoe rentals. And up in this area, we have what's called a scientific forestry management area, which we do scientific logging. I mean, sustainable harvesting. So we sell a lot of wood as well. And that's how the park is run, with no monies taken from state coffers, which kind of, it's good on the one hand, and it's bad. The park administration will, when it's convenient, they'll tell us, well, the state's making us do that. And when they don't feel like it, they'll say, well, we're going to do things our way. So it works out well for park administration. In 2012, we bought a section, a really small part over here on Katahdin Lake, and this was 2006. So we've added little chunks since the governor left. The West Branch lands down here along the West Branch of the Penobscot since the governor passed away. So we've slowly expanded. The other thing that's interesting, sort of noteworthy, over here is Katahdin Woods and Waters National Park now. So when I started at the park, there was still a lot of land up in this area, over in this area, that was owned by paper companies. And now it's almost 500,000 acres of wilderness. I mean, this is all owned by the Nature Conservancy, Chewonki, other conservation organizations. And now this is owned by the federal government. So it's become quite a huge mass of wildland. And that's what it looks like. So of course, this is the knife edge, which many people have heard of. Chimney Pond, Hamlin Ridge. Just a lot of the time, a lot of time when I do these talks, people have not heard of the place. So they need to see these pictures to know what we're talking about. Here's another look at Chimney, Knife Edge. The summit's right up here. This is more my neighborhood. This is Double Top Mountain, which is one of my favorites. It looms over the cabin where I stay. And this is the Satahunk Stream, which goes by right by my camp. And this is the bridge that goes to Kidney Pond. There's Daisy Pond and Kidney Pond, which are the two campgrounds in the park that have cabins. They used to be old sporting camps. Katahdin Stream Falls. We once fished a guy who fell 25 feet into the falls, and it's pretty unforgiving to fall 25 feet onto granite. Just saying. He was in pretty rough shape. So that's my house. That's where I live for 6 months of the year. This is Double Top. That's a thunderstorm. And about, maybe where that wall is would be the Appalachian Trail. So I see AT hikers go by all day long. And I'm thankful there's a breeze. So this is my duty station. I always like to tell people I have my name on a building. And it's pretty humble place. These are backpack tanks for fighting fires. Everybody wants to know, are those for mosquitoes? No, they are for putting out blazes. Canoe rental, firewood, purchasing firewood. That's where that's basically where I start and end most days. But I don't spend a whole lot of time in. One of the things that I like about my job that's different, say, than the National Park Service is when you go to Acadia and you walk up to a ranger station, there's almost always somebody behind the desk. That's their job. They sit there. We range. I always like to tell people we range by definition. So if I'm not at my desk, it's because I'm ranging. Supposed to be ranging. At the NPS, they long ago did a division of labors. So they have janitorial staff that does all the toilets, and then they have trail crew that does all the trails, and they have law enforcement that look like cops and drive cruisers, and they have interpretive rangers who tell you what you're looking at, and maintenance rangers who work on the landscaping projects and things. And at Baxter, we tend to do all of that, which is one of the things that makes it exciting. I always tell people that, yes, I have to clean toilets in the morning, which I always call it playing 9 holes. Where do you get to play 9 holes every morning? But that allows me to go on rescues and fight forest fires and do all these other cool things. And that is basically my office. This is Daisy Pond, obviously Katahdin. This is the owl, the Barren Mountain. We've got 6 canoes, 3 kayaks, and they're all for rent. And so folks will come all day long, whether they're camping there or not, and take boats out and paddle around. We're one of the great fisheries in the Northeast we're between Daisy, Kidney, the West Branch, and all of the sort of satellite ponds around us. It's one of the great places to go fishing for brook trout. So in the spring and then back again in September, I have just lots and lots of fisher folk. So this is what the rental cabins where I am stationed look like. This happens to be a 2-bedroom cabin. Obviously, it's a disability cabin, so it allows folks who are not that mobile to get in. They each have a wood stove and a gas light, propane light, and depending on obviously the number of people, I mean, this is a 2-person, so it's got 2 bunks with actually comfortable mattresses. I mean, they're not bad at all. And I always tell people it's essentially like having a tent, in that you got to bring your sleeping bag, you got to bring all your cooking stuff. There's nothing in here that you wouldn't, other than the building itself. So, and the mattresses to sleep on and something to keep you warm. So it's no different. It's kind of glamping, yes, but on the other hand, it's not like we provide linens and meals and all that kind of stuff. I always like to tell folks it's good for like young people. You don't want your kids' first experience when they go camping to wake up in an inch of water or to be harassed all night by mosquitoes. So bring them here, get them into it, and then you put them in a tent. Or at the other end of life, when folks are tired of sleeping on the ground, we've got bunks and it's comfortable. Here's one of the holes that I play every day. And this is our wood shed where I spend a lot of time cutting firewood and putting up wood. Here's another 2-person cabin. So you get the idea. That one of the things that's nice about Daisy is that we are very private. There's a lot of forest immediately. At Kidney Pond, which is the other cabin campground, it's all spread out along a field. Here you have a lot more tree buffers and it's a lot quieter. So this is another 2-person bunk. Again, there's not much more than a cooking table, a gas light, a wood stove, and a couple mattresses, and a nice porch with a fantastic view. And at Daisy and Kidney, we have libraries, and this would be the Kidney Pond Library. It's much bigger than the Daisy Pond Library. These tables were built from an old bowling alley. The Colt family of the Colt 45 used to have a camp on one of the points at Kidney Pond. And they had a bowling alley there. And when they decided to go separate ways, they donated the material, and the park made tables out of old bowling alley. There are actually a few good books in here. And the libraries are great. As you can see, this is a ginormous puzzle piece. They're great for rainy days. Again, for kids, they can color, they can do puzzles. We'll have lots of family groups that will meet and eat at night. And we have a lot of staff meetings in particularly the Kidney Pond Library. Because we'll go to do firefighting training, we'll go do wilderness medical training, all kinds of different things in here because it's just big enough to accommodate a lot of people. And we did a big potluck for volunteers. We have a lot of volunteers who come and help us do various projects during the year. And October, we had a volunteer get together here with lots of good food. So this is the Daisy Pond Library, and this is what people do. If I had known about this, I would have gone and talked to them because it's public consumption, open container, public place. That's illegal, but I didn't know. These are some of my they're some of my regulars who come back year after year. Happens to be a pretty well-known Maine artist and a couple of fishing guys that come every year to fish. But one of the nice things at Daisy Pond is that we have this clientele that just comes back and back and back and back. It's nice. I've seen people that bring their kids that, you know, when they're tiny and now they're in college and beyond at bringing their kids. So it's a lot of fun that way. You get to meet people from all over. So a lot of people will say to me, well, you are a writer. How do you become a park ranger from being a writer? Did you have to go to college for it? The answer is no. What we do at Baxter Park is a lot of this. We do, I got hired because I had a guide's license. I was a volunteer firefighter, so I had done street rescue. And I had, as a writer, I knew the park in and out because I had spent a lot of time there writing about various places and personalities. So the park kind of was aware of me and knew that I knew and loved the place, and that I had the Maine Warden Service said you're somewhat competent in the woods. And as a firefighter, again, I had done rescue. So what the park does is hires people that they think seem like potential. And then they put us through all kinds of different training modules, basically. So this obviously is a helicopter training with the Forest Service, who are our brothers and sisters. In this case, we are learning how they want to be signaled from the air when we do a rescue, how to approach the bird, what not to do, how to talk with them from the ground, what they need to know. And we usually do at least one of these, and they're fun because usually we get to go up and fly around. That's a good time. So I'm somewhere in this picture, but I don't know exactly where. So we do a lot of these trainings. We do forest fire. These guys are wearing Nomex, which is standard forest fighting flame retardant material. This again, Forest Service guys. We do at least a helicopter safety training with usually the Forest Service and the Guard. I think that's what's up next here. And this is definitely your faithful correspondent. And this is my partner for 10 or 12 years in the park. And in this case, we're learning, the colonel is teaching us again about what they need to know, because when we do rescues, you have to, if we're wearing our uniforms, which sort of blend in with the landscape, and we're just working with patients, you know, under tree cover, the Guard has a really hard time finding us. So they want us to know how to flag them, we use a lot of Siloom sticks. We use a lot of tarps and things just to make something that visual that they can see. And then we need to know how to talk to them, what frequencies to talk to them on. We do a lot of what's called, with the Guard, we do a lot of hot loading, which means the bird touches down and then we run the stretcher over and put it on the bird and they take off. And that's while the rotors are going. So you need to know when you don't ever approach the bird from the front, for example, because that's where the rotors get the lowest. And so we go through these training modules with the Guard. They do a lot of rescue. We do a lot of rescues, well, maybe 3 or 4 a year with the Guard. They have a winch, and so they can hover and drop down a medic. They actually have paramedics on board, and we will package the patients in a litter, and they'll hook it into their system and be winched up and pulled aboard, and they take off. The Forest Service does what's called a short haul, which is human external cargo. So the helicopter flies and the patient and the crewman fly underneath it on a rope about 150 feet below. And whenever we do trainings, we all fight to be the patient. I've never been lucky enough to get to fly. So we do two types of, well, more than two types of extractions, but those are the two most common, with a winch and then with a short haul. When we work on the ground, I've done lots of short hauls. It's kind of neat because it's like you have the biggest kite in the whole world holding onto the rope so that the crewman coming down the rope doesn't hit the trees. It's really kind of a neat experience. The guard uses these missions as training missions for their work overseas, when they go off into war zones. So they don't charge us. As I said, they have a paramedic aboard, so they have more medical capability than we do. The Forest Service simply has a crewman who will strap in with the patient and then they will take off. They don't have any medical expertise. So usually we end up doing, I would say 4 or 5 or 6, something like that, air extractions a year. So we go through helicopter training. This is a search and rescue training. This is a improvised carry exercise. So I created a backpack harness system, and it goes underneath the thighs so that you can carry someone on your back comfortably, and they don't always feel like they're going to fall over backwards. We oftentimes will rig up litter systems, carry systems with just tarps and canoe paddles, with backpacks, anything that we can put a patient on and make sure that it's secure and get them safely out of wherever they are. I have done this once in real life. Luckily, the person that I was carrying was like 99 pounds and a lot smaller than Holly here. We did, 3 of us carried an injured woman off all the way from the tableland. Just each of us would go about a quarter mile or so, and then we'd pass off. There's three rangers on that one. Typically, when you do a carry, you have a lot of people, but in that instance, we only had a few. So this is what it looks like to do a short haul from my end. This is me. This is Ranger Nick McPherson. This is our patient. This is the crewman. So basically on this one, I got called, well, actually, I think I was awakened. I always have a radio in my camp. And I woke up at, I think it was around midnight one night, and I could hear radio traffic. So I started paying attention, because usually there's no radio traffic in the middle of the night. And I heard that there was someone that they were looking for on the A-ball trail. So I foolishly called up and said, "You guys need any help?" And they said, "Yeah, get down to A-ball." So I went down to A-ball, and they sent me and Nick here up, and we went, a woman that had a knee injury. We went 2/3 of the way up the A-ball trail, and we got to her probably like 2 in the morning. And we had been told that she had the torn meniscus, blown her knee out, and was immobile. And when we got there, she had a guy with her, and they were walking down the trail. And the guy told us he was an EMT and that her knee was unstable, but they were making their way. So what we ended up doing was putting a splint on the knee. And we went down probably until, so we got to her at about 2, and we went down to about 6 a.m. when the sun came up, at which point we got to this clearing, and she sat down on a rock and said she's not going any farther. So then we radio in and said, we have a patient. The patient is no longer mobile. And they said, well, we'll get back to you. We're going to check with the guard or the Forest Service. Forest Service was able to scramble a crew. And so this is Ranger Ben Goodwin of the Forest Service. And at, 6:45, he drops from the sky and puts the patient in what's called the screamer suit, which is, it looks kind of like a Farmer John wetsuit. And you zip yourself in, you lock yourself in, and then the crewman clips in with you, and 2 of you go up and out. For a short haul, a short haul by definition means that you're not going very far. So they, in this case, flown maybe 5 miles to Caribou Pit, where there was a waiting ambulance, and she was taken to the hospital. And then the next day, there was a news article that said that Ranger Ben Goodwin rescued a woman off the A-ball trail, and 2 Baxter Park Rangers assisted. He was with her for maybe 14 minutes. We were with her for 5-6 hours, but that's not why we do it. So, but one of the coolest things in the whole world is to hear that sound when you're on looking for somebody or you're carrying somebody of an incoming bird, because you know that your load's going to get lighter really quick. So this is an example of, we call it SAR. Most civilians, as my kid says, call it search and rescue. So this shows you in 2019, we did a total of 39. Typically, we do more like 60 or 70 rescues in a year. This shows you the geographic location of all of these. So the Hunt Trail is my bailiwick, and the A-Ball Trail, and pretty much this is the west side, and this is the more popular east side. Chimney Pond Trail, which feeds several trails, was obviously the place where most incidents happen. And the Hunt Trail was not far behind with 9 incidents. So it's just, it shows you we don't get a lot super high typically, which would be the Knife Edge or the Heel and Taylor. But you just never know. The mountain is pretty unforgiving territory. And these are the top 5 causes for SAR, search and rescue. We did a big study, as you can see, between 92 and 2014 by our medical director. These are the most common reasons we would go up the mountain: lower extremity injury, so the knee the lady had that was blown out. We do lots of ankle sprains and twisted ankles and mangled knees, and just stands to reason, broken feet. Exhaustion, I kind of was really surprised when I saw this. I would have thought those would have been swapped. Exhaustion, we usually say exhaustion / dehydration. That would seem to me that I wouldn't be surprised if in other, well, no, that's a pretty big time frame represented, but it just seems to me we get so many calls for, I can't go any farther. I got what we call spaghetti legs, and just bit off way more than I can chew, and I didn't bring enough to drink. Very, very common. A lot of people just don't really realize how much water a body needs when its humidity is super high and it's 86 degrees out. You can almost not drink enough to keep up with what you're losing in those circumstances. So lost parties would be number 3, head injuries number 4. This again would seem to me flipped in my experience anyway. I have done some head injuries, and we had a guy with he dislocated his shoulder on the Hunt Trail climbing down from the monkey bars, and his pack got stuck and he kept going and wrenched himself. So we get occasionally upper extremity injuries, sometimes what we call a foosh, or a fell on outstretched hand. Those are somewhat common. So again, we do 40 to 50, somewhere up in there, a typical year, 50, 60. And I personally get involved in 5 or 6 or 7 of these. Most of the time, like I said, it would be on our side, the west side of the mountain. If there's a really big event, it might be that I get to go on the other side of the mountain. I think some of the biggest rescues I've ever done were on the Chimney Pond side of the mountain. So if you figure I'm there 6 months of the year, I start in May and go through the end of October, it's 6 months. Once a month, I get called out to do something exciting. So this would be SAR incidents by month. So you can see when I get there in May and I leave at the end of October, that is the vast majority of when we see incidents. We had 4 fatalities. I think it was 2019, and 2 of those happened in the winter, which winter obviously is pretty rough, and it's when the park feels really wild. Most of our visitation, typically are your summer months. So right in here is where we have most of our incidents. We have had 1 ranger die in the line of duty, and that was in October, a freak blizzard in October. in 1964. And that was, he died of exposure on the knife edge. So we do, so the training that we go through is we do search and rescue training, as I mentioned, firefighting, firefighting. Most of us are wildland firefighters, yes, certified through FEMA. I shouldn't say most, a lot of us are. We do either wilderness advanced first aid or wilderness first responder. Most of us these days are now for wilderness first responders. So we'll go through wilderness first responders, 70 hours. I think, did we say it was 70 hours? 70 hours of training. This is Lily, who lives in the park with me and is the one that knows the real stuff. And we do forest fire suppression. We've done de-escalation training. We at the park, I am not a commissioned officer, but we do enforcement of the rules. So if there's somebody's murdering somebody, we're not going to be the ones that will be responding. But if I need to kick people out of the park, if it's AT hikers are illegal camping, we can do that kind of stuff. So we can enforce the rules of the park, but not necessarily the laws of the nation, if that makes any sense. So we've gone through de-escalation training, what we call verbal judo. We do first responder training, as I said. We've done mental health first aid for folks that are having really hard times. What we call in the business 1044s, people that have a mental issue. So we went through that training, and then I think within 4 or 5 weeks, I used it the first time. We had a whole raft of incidents with 1044s. The folks that are on a different trail than most of the other people, I guess. This particular fellow he's probably, he's ginormous. And he was a southbound AT hiker. And he showed up on literally crawling up onto I showed you my office, up the steps. And he wanted to know if he could camp there. Do you have any tent sites? And I said, no, we don't have any tent sites. You got to go back to Katahdin Stream. And he said, I'm not going anywhere. Turned out he was having heat stroke. So I could tell he was obviously in distress. So I sat him down and cooled him off and got him water. And I started to do the sort of medical questioning that we do. And I asked him, are you on any meds? I am supposed to be. Okay. He said that he was put on meds. He's supposed to not, the judge said that he shouldn't be around other people. And that's why he started doing the AT. But because he was on the AT, he didn't think he'd be able to fulfill his prescription. So he didn't figure it was worth bringing him. So, yeah. So anyway, I call this in to the chief ranger, and the chief says, would he get into an ambulance? I said, yeah, I'll get into an ambulance. So we ended up putting him in an ambulance, which one of the first things we learned in our mental health first aid training was that folks who are off their meds really ought to see a doctor to see if they can get back onto their meds. And so we put him, he was very, very, I mean, he was telling me that his urine was brown, which is a very bad thing, most people know. And that he was having kidney pain because he was so dehydrated. So we figured he needed to be hydrated and get back on his meds. So into Millinocket he goes in an AMBO. But that just shows you that it was only weeks since we had gone through the wilderness, mental health first aid training, and there it is. So over the years, we have a standard number of things that we train for. Again, wilderness first responder, wildland firefighter. We have to be certified to use a chainsaw. So we all go through chainsaw training, search and rescue training. And then like I said, we've been adding all these interesting other little modules. We've done flat water and swift water rescue. We've done death investigation, which was kind of gruesome but interesting because that was the year that we had 4 fatalities, and they figured you should know what to do if you come upon a body in the woods. So we did death investigation. We did search and seizure, Fourth Amendment type what our rights as rangers are in, or what we should be thinking about in terms of search and seizure. So we have a standard group of trainings that everybody goes through, and then we have other stuff that's offered periodically. We've done incident command training, so you know how to run a big a fire or another large incident, like maybe a mass casualty incident. This here was obviously a fire. This is the west branch of the Penobscot, and obviously the mountain in the background. This was in May of the year of COVID, so 2020. And because of COVID, we started late that year, and we are all doing a lot of this training on Zoom from our homes. And we had a visit from the head of Baxter Park's sort of board of directors, are the head of Maine Forest Service, the head of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife, and the state attorney general. And so we had a visit that spring from the head of the Forest Service, who just wanted to say hello and welcome back for your season and thanks for everything you do. And she told us that they had 400 something fires already in May, and that it was extremely dry. So I would just happen to type out a little note to one of my park ranger buddies and said, we're going to have a fire this year. Well, that afternoon, we started seeing all these rangers sign off and say, I'm going to fight the fire, going to fight the fire, going to fight the fire. And it was along the Appalachian Trail. We still don't have a confirmed reason. We've never figured out exactly why, but we're thinking that it started from a campfire, illegal hikers campfire. And anyway, it got out of control and it burned, I want to say 1,000 acres, something like that. It was a big fire by Baxter standards. We had 2 birds for air support, which would just fly. You can see they have a bucket and they dip it, and it's not any more technical than that. And then they upend it over the fire. And it just so happened that the Forest Service had 2 aircraft working another fire, and they could move them over onto this fire, which was bigger. And that was the good thing, but the sad thing for me, because I texted my supervisor, put me in, coach. And he said, you're too far away, because I was down in this area. You're too far away, so you don't get to go fight this fire. And so I was hoping that they would realize overnight that it was so big that they would need us to go up and help. But they had it all out within 24 hours, which was great. Not too much land was affected. And it's made for a neat sort of hiking area to go along and see the burn. And the regeneration, it's kind of cool. You typically, maybe 1 fire a year that I will go deal with. Last year, I guess it would be 2 years ago. I had a big one up on the very northernmost sliver of the park on Mattagamon Lake. There was a lightning strike that I went and fought. And Lily here and I went and put out a campfire, illegal campfire, just this past season. But I haven't gotten onto too many really huge ones. Most of the time, what I end up doing is this, which is talking to folks about checking in folks, talking to them about their plans, answering questions. This is the inside of the building that you were looking at, my ranger station. So obviously we got maps and lots of handouts, the guest book, rescue pack. You can see that we have various we've got a backboard in case we need it. We have a Stokes and other more more technical things than a backboard in our garage. We have O2 canisters, we have an AED. Each station now is pretty well, we've got a hypothermia bag wrap kit, so to speak. So we have each station, there's 10 duty stations in Baxter Park, and each one is equipped with all of this stuff so that if in the event of an emergency, we can all respond right from our stations or our trucks, wherever we may be. And I spend a lot of time doing that. Yeah, over there. And usually I'm pointing at that. This is what everybody wants to know, obviously. the sad thing is, in my 20 years at the park, it used to be when I started, just walking around, you'd see footprints, you'd see scat, you'd see, sign everywhere that these guys were around. And now, uh, maybe once a month, I'll see some evidence, see a moose or see evidence of a moose. Um, and a lot of the thinking is that, well, there's a few schools. One, as I explained before, there's not really a lot of tree cutting and going around on the borders of the park anymore. And moose, ironically, really like freshly cut, browse. They used to like clear cuts. And it's also obviously been getting hotter and hotter. And ticks have moved into the area, and we will find moose with 10,000, 20,000 ticks on them, which ginormous bulls can withstand, but the calves just don't have the fortitude to, sort of death by 1,000 little suckers. So our moose population is definitely declining. There's another one. There's Mama. Oh, that's not Mama. Anyway, this is how I end most days. You can see, as I said, AED. This is lost and found stuff. Hypothermia wrap. The trusty radio. We don't have phones. No, cell service doesn't work unless you're up high. So we are on our trusty handhelds all day long. That's how we talk to each other. And this is a base radio and flashlight. These days it's headlamps. This is a pretty old photo, but rangers do a surprising amount of paperwork. Nobody really thinks about that, but I do a lot of incident reports, and I do a lot of maintenance reports, and we have trail reports, and we have various monies that we take in for renting things. So you got to account for all the different monies that you take in, and work logs, and just on and on. This is me doing a cash up here, and this is me checking folks in my little trusty Smokey the Bear book and putting it into the desk calendar so I know who is where and that everybody is where they're supposed to be. And this is typically what it looks like at the end of the season. Almost every year that I've been there, we've had snow, and at some amount. This was 2021, I think, 2 or 3 inches. It seems like the storms have been getting bigger and bigger. It seems like every year we cut our way into the park and we cut our way out of the park. So this was one of the first snows of the season, 2 or 3 inches. And that's my trusty steed. And this is Maynard's Marsh, which is a big bog that's just down the road from Daisy Pond. And these are some, Katahdin is right here. This is Barron and OJI. Some of the other peaks in the area. Everybody focuses on Katahdin, but we've got dozens and dozens of other great climbs. This particular truck only has 2-wheel drive, so this time of year when we get going down A-Ball Hill, which is like a mile with an inclination like this, it gets kind of scary. And I am not year round. I'm a seasonal. That was my 20th season that I finished about a month and a half ago. And some years I will go back and help do winter projects just because it's fun and I get to drive a snow sled and get a place to stay for free. And it's just adventure. The park really, that's when it feels wild, that like if you make a mistake, you could really pay for it. But we always have to carry snowshoes and we bring saws, and everybody takes a pretty full pack just to make sure that we are all safe. It's kind of neat though to see you can obviously range farther than you can in the woods than you can by foot. And you can obviously cross a lot of lakes faster than you can in any other way. So it's kind of a fun time of year to explore. And when the leaves are down, you see a lot of things that you don't see other times of year, of course. And one of the things I haven't seen actually any other time of year is these are lynx. And on that particular trip that I just showed you there, I got to see a family. It was 2 big lynx and 2 smaller lynx. I can't tell you the gender, but it seemed to me that mom and the 2 kids were trying to flush snowshoe hare into the road. Snowshoe hare is a lynx's favorite snack. And whenever we show up in the spring, there's lots of snowshoe hares. And by the end of our seasons, there's often not a lot of snowshoe hares. So these guys are getting them. Occasionally we'll have campers that will report a sighting, but I've never seen one in the wild other than this particular trip when I got to see 4. And despite their reputation, which is sort of solitary and quiet and elusive, they couldn't seem to be bothered at all that we were standing right there taking pictures. This is me out in, I think it's South Branch Pond that we're at. Again, out in the middle, which is the fun part. And this is part of that same family. They're they're big, impressive creatures. We spent a lot of time after seeing them, taking pictures of their paw prints and recording stuff for inland fisheries and wildlife to keep track of the lynx population. This was the year of COVID. Everybody said, what was it like to be a park ranger during COVID? This is what it was like. It was the worst thing. We had to wear full Tyvek suits if we went on rescues. That's my supervisor and one of my best buddies. And we had to go everywhere. Anytime you were with anybody else anywhere, you had to wear a mask. Obviously, we had lots of extra cleaning protocols, and any rescues were quite a pain because you had to make sure everybody was safe, obviously. And that is how Daisy Pond looks towards the end of the season. I think that takes me to the back to the beginning. So I'm happy to answer any questions anybody has about what life is like as a park ranger. Yes.
Yeah. So what do you do with the animals in terms of, like you mentioned the ticks? Are you doing forensics on animals you find to figure out what's happening to them, if there's illegal hunting going on?
It depends on the situation. Sometimes we don't do that so much as we'll report it to Inland Fisheries and Wildlife, who are, so as I mentioned at the beginning, we're our directors, the board of directors, so to speak, are what the Baxter State Park Authority is the head of IFNW, head of Forest Service, and the state attorney general. So they will do a lot of that kind of, as I was saying before, we were taking data for the lynx surveys. We will pass on intel to the biology folks to try to figure out what's been happening. Yeah. Anyone else?
Yes.
Are the wolves in the park?
There are no wolves in the park. No, I have had, it's funny, there's one particular ranger who's a curmudgeonly old guy that's been there probably longer than anybody else. And he's not the kind that would, he's quite the skeptic and very pragmatic and an old Mainer. He swears that he came up over a hill, Aball Hill, so in the south end of the park, and saw something that was just way too big to be a coyote, which we know we have, but it was a canid and it was big. We don't have any recorded wolves, but we've heard that. We've heard talk of cougar. Again, it's one of those. Nobody can prove it, but people say it. Don't know. I saw another hand back there.
Yeah. Do the park rangers have police power as far as arrests or citations?
Yeah, we have a handful of rangers who do go, who are commissioned law enforcement officers that go to the Criminal Justice Academy. Most of us are uncommissioned and we can enforce the rules of the park, but if we have actual, felony type situations, we do have a group of rangers on staff who are fully commissioned. We also have game wardens in the neighborhood who we work with a lot too for law enforcement. And we don't have as much. I mean, there has been some action in terms of law enforcement, but we don't have as much as you might think. There's a stat that I read somewhere that a law enforcement park ranger at the national park level is the most dangerous federal law enforcement occupation. But we don't see as much of the kind of stuff they do. I think that has to do with being way out west and having drug rings and smuggling and human trafficking and all the stuff along the border, because a lot of times those guys will respond individually and it becomes pretty dangerous pretty quick. Other questions?
Is the big black bear population in the park?
It's very healthy. Yeah. We don't, I there, well, not in the park. Where I'm stationed at Daisy Pond, we are very close to the border. And so sometimes we'll have, I'm going to go very fast, don't get sick. Sometimes we will have problem bears and we'll find that they, actually, this is probably a better one. When bear hunting, I'm down here, we'll have problem bears and they'll go just across the border and there's a lot of guides that work out of this area and the problem bears. No, this is Nessadahunk Lake. So it's Greenville's still quite a ways away this way. Yeah. Ripajimas Dam is over here. Chesuncook Lake. But this is Nessadahunk Lake. And there's just a popular guide there that does a lot of bear hunts. In fact, a couple of years ago, I was going up to Nessadahunk. We're responsible for our region and 2 miles around our region in terms of trail maintenance and things like that around our station. But I do a lot of projects with the rangers at Kidney Pond just because they can use a hand sometimes. And the rangers at Katahdin Stream, we'll just wherever as needed so I will sometimes be sent up north to cover Nessadahunk Campground, which is up here. And I was going up one day to Nessadahunk. I was on a blowdown patrol. We had a big storm that blew through and I was driving up to Daisy Pond's responsibility when there's a blowdown, when there's a huge windstorm, is to clear the road from this stretch of road right here. So I was driving along in my truck and I came around a corner and there was a ginormous dog. No dogs are allowed in the park. There's 1042s. But this dog was a huge hound. I mean, like ginormous. And so I stop and I get out and I opened my door and I went around this way and he went around this way and climbed right in my truck. And it's what we call a bear dog for bear hunting. And so he sat in the front seat in driver's seat and I had to push him over into the passenger seat. And unfortunately, he had been out 3 weeks or so. They had been looking for him. His radio collar was not working. And so he was very thin and sort of emaciated and had lots of sores. And so he just kind of put his head on me and I called him in and said, I've got a bear dog in my truck. And they said, well, bring him down to A-Ball. And so the district ranger met me at A-Ball and brought him back. And he was he did work for this guide. So he was reunited with his owner, but it's very unusual for us to see dogs. And well, I shouldn't say that. These days, there's a lot of people that like to bring in service dogs. And there's a lot of people that bring in legit service dogs. And then we have AT hikers who bring in service dogs that I think they transport their weed. So not providing a real service. But bear dogs are not as much, but they go with the bear hunting. Somebody else had a question. I saw another hand. Yes.
What do you do from October to May?
This. I always say that I make my living as a writer and that I do this because it's fun and because ever since I was 5, wanted to be a park ranger. So, and it has been, I've gotten it when I was a kid, I imagined, you fly around in helicopters and you fight forest fires and you rescue people out of rivers and off the mountains. And I've gotten to do all of that. Even, it sounds like a little boy's dreams, but it's real. It's pretty neat. Other questions? Yeah.
What are the visitor numbers? How's the trend going there? Is it up or down?
Yeah, it's funny. We had, when I started, it was pretty busy. And so typically Baxter Park gets 60, 70,000 visitors a year. And when you compare that to like an Acadia, which is 4 million.
How many? 60 to 70,000?
1,000, yeah. So in the scheme of things, it's not a whole lot like compared to an Acadia. It seems like a lot to us. So what happened was by the internet comes along and by like the maybe 2007, 2008, our numbers started really tanking. It was true across the country, I guess, that in national parks, people wanted to get out and hike and things, but they wanted to go to a place where they could go have a beer afterwards, or they weren't sleeping in tents on the ground. But since then, we've had a big resurgence. I think the AT numbers are up as high as they've been. This year, they were not quite as high as we've seen, but they're pretty dang close. But COVID came along and we got sort of deluged with folks. What we've been seeing is since the Woods and Waters opened over here, we've been seeing a lot of new folks that don't have a whole lot of experience. So our day use numbers are really up. So it's healthy. Yeah, people are getting out again. Yes, ma'am.
You had mentioned that the fire may have been started by an illegal hiker or a.
Yeah.
And what are the regulations?
So at Baxter Park, because one of the things that distinguishes Baxter Park is that we are wilderness first and we are preservation first. So our mission is to preserve and protect the park, and human recreation comes a distant second or third. And a lot of folks are not used to that. One of the ways we protect the park is by regulating numbers. So we'll literally regulate the number of hikers on the mountain. So we'll, at a certain point on a Saturday morning in August, usually around 20 after 7, after opening practically, we shut it all down because our parking lots are all full. And in order to give folks a wilderness experience on top, we just can't have the place crawling with people. So, and the way we do it as far as camping is you have to have a designated site, and there's only so many designated sites. Excuse me. So by 10 p.m. at night, on any given night, you have to be in a designated site, or you have to have like, people still will be coming down the mountain at 10 p.m. routinely. And people, you're allowed to walk around, you can go for a paddle or whatever, but you have to have a campsite. Otherwise you're illegally camping. And so what we see a lot of is people letting themselves into the park. A lot of folks coming in, they'll sneak around the gates. They'll come in from one of, often down along the AT, and they'll just set up camp illegally. And I've responded to a few campfires that were illegal, set up by illegal campers. And one of the adventures that we have is at night going around and finding folks who are not where they're supposed to be. So the AT, Appalachian Trail through hiker community, there's a percentage, small, but that stealth camp that they don't want to pay the $10 to stay, so they just set up wherever they feel like, and then we go pinch them. The Appalachian Trail comes up kind of, actually here's Rainbow, so it comes up like this, and then it comes into the park kind of like this. So Dacey Pond, like I said, is right on the AT. It comes up like this and then goes over to Katahdin. And so right outside my window is where the AT hikers go. And sometimes I'll see headlamps at night when I know they shouldn't be there, and I'll have to get dressed and put my uniform back on and go see what they're about. But some of the best folks I ever met were from the AT, and we have a percentage that don't feel like they need to abide by the rules. Especially from the AT tends to be 2 large communities. Well, there's actually 3 big communities: retirees, and almost to a person, all the retirees I've met have been awesome. And then there's this, I just finished high school or college, and my mom and dad gave me whatever, $6,000 to go do the AT. And sometimes those folks have less, they're less noble intentions when they get to Baxter Park. And then we get a lot of vets, which is kind of a neat thing. And they tend to be a cool crowd too. So, yeah. Other questions? Yes.
What are the responsibilities of an AT hiker, both entering the park and leaving the park? What are they required? What's your relationship with those guys in that regard?
So AT hikers, when they're obliged to register at their at first convenience, I guess you would say. So they will come in and go by my duty station. Well, they'll sign the hiking roster at right down here. We have a kiosk, and you're entering Baxter State Park, and they'll sign there at the register there. And we have a patrol ranger that runs the AT, a ridge runner. And so oftentimes he or she, depending on the year, will talk to the AT folks. He'll radio ahead to Katahdin. The Katahdin Stream campground, which again is in this area, is responsible for registering all the AT hikers. So we have, they will log folks in, find them a space for the night if they need to, and we have a permit system. They'll make out a permit. Here's your pass. AT hikers then will typically climb. We have a little encampment. It's 2 lean-tos and a couple of tent platforms that accommodate a dozen, I believe, AT hikers each night, just outside Katahdin Stream. So typically an AT hiker will come in, they'll register at Katahdin Stream, they'll go camp for the night, and the next day they'll climb. And then typically they will make their way out of the park, and at the gate we ask them to turn in their permit so we can account for what, have where they are basically and the numbers.
So here's a question in that regard. I imagine that most people, like if one of us wanted to go to the park, we'd have to pre-register.
Yes.
He said, I imagine it's still the scene,
Correct.
January, first business day.
Well, we don't do what's called the line anymore. We don't have that January registration anymore, which is sad. But a director a couple of years ago decided that it wasn't worth the staff that he would have to bring on for that one particular day. So we did away with that. But yes, we have what's called a 4-month rolling reservation. So 4 months prior to when you want to stay, that is when you put in for your reservation. But
an AT hiker can just
show up.
So they don't have to call you from like Monson or.
Correct. Yep. So the way we handle it is northbound AT hikers, we assume have limited communication abilities. And so they can come in. What they do is they get to the kiosk that I mentioned was down on the West Branch and sign in, and we can accommodate about a dozen a night. So what we'll do is they'll put their name on I want to stay at the Birches tonight. And so and that will by late August and September, we start to see a lot of AT hikers. So there's quite a competition. People get up at 2, 3 in the morning to get their name on that list. If they're not able to get a site, then they'll talk to either the ridge runner, somebody at Katahdin Stream, a ranger that they come across and say, I don't have a site, can you help me? And then we'll do our best to accommodate them. And oftentimes we can, but sometimes you can't. And then it's 6 miles that way. You got to get out of here because you don't have a place to stay tonight. So those are sometimes the folks that we'll find somewhere down in here, camped along the side of the trail, and they will.
So if I wanted to head south from Katahdin,
Yes.
do I have to have
You would register as if you were anybody else because you're starting, you have the ability to make calls. Usually you'll have an automobile with you. So that makes it easier for you to just be like anybody else and make your own reservation that way. Sometimes folks will just come in and do it all in one day, which is pretty brutal, especially when you're newbie. By that, I mean, they will get a ride, do the 12 miles up and down Katahdin, and then they'll do the 6 miles out and just do it that way. But typically people will just make a reservation, have their parents or whomever drop them off, and then start their way southbound. And we end up, there's a lot of folks that don't get much farther than southbound than right about in here before they decide it's not for them anymore.
Is that the very beginning of the trail?
Yeah. So the AT starts in Springer Mountain, Georgia, and finishes at Katahdin. But obviously, if you're going the other way, it starts at Katahdin and you start heading south. And the mountain spanks a lot of people I've done a number of rescues of southbounders who they haven't done their homework, they haven't gotten fit, they don't have the right gear, all the things. So then we end up going and then I've done a fair amount of northbounders too, but the southbound crowd is definitely a group demographic that we're familiar with. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
What happens with campers that you happen to come upon in the middle of the night and they're there illegally? They up and head out?
Yeah.
That's it?
Yeah, I remember one night I was at my duty station again at Daisy Pond looking at that. And one of my ranger buddies was standing there with me, and a fisherman came in and he said, "Are there supposed to be lights on the other side of the pond?" And I said, "No, there's not supposed to be any lights on the other side of the pond." He said, "Well, there's a bunch of lights on the other side of the pond." So this other ranger and I looked at each other and said, "You want to go for a paddle?" So we paddled over, and as we got almost to the far shore, I slipped out, and we called it the Navy SEAL raid because I went over the edge and I got soaked, and he started cracking up. I'm like, "What the heck are you doing?" I'm like, "Well, I'm going to sneak up on him." So they were camped up over here just off the Appalachian Trail, and they had genius put lots of string, looked like a little restaurant, string lights in the trees. So I snuck up on them, and at the very last second turned my flashlight on, and they jumped, and I'm like, "Hey guys, what you doing?" And so we talked for a while, and it was obvious that they had done the southbound thing, like I mentioned, where they thought they were going to go up and down the mountain and then out, and that was as far as they could get. They were just beat, and so they weren't going out. And so we ended up hiking them out to the Birches, out to Daisy Pond, putting them in a truck, taking them to the Birches, which is the place where overnight AT hikers stay, and those guys got a summons both for illegal camping. Sometimes we will transport. Lily and I transported a illegal AT hiker out of the park. I don't remember when that was, August or September, who had been camping in the park for about 5 nights, he said. Maybe it was 4, but anyway, several nights illegally. And he gets a summons, and I happen to be leaving the park, and the supervisor said, "You want to take him out and by the Painted Rock?" And I took him to the Painted Rock, and he walked into town with his summons in his pocket.
I mean, those situations must get kind of tense occasionally, right? I mean,
Sometimes.
confrontational.
Yeah, sometimes. In my experience, the people that have been the least happy are the people that we tell, "No, you're not climbing today because the parking lots are full and you can't go up the mountain." Those are the moments where I have had people standing, spitting in my face. Just, "I drove from Delaware to climb this mountain. Sorry, it's closed." Yeah, and those are oftentimes the people who illegally camp are more chagrined than anything. I mean, they put their heads go down, and they know they don't get as angry sometimes. Sometimes when you confront AT hikers and tell them they can't do certain things, and when you confront folks who want to climb and you tell them, "No, you're not climbing," they can get belligerent. And we have your usual drunk and disorderly and everything else. But I haven't had too many people where I've said, you're out of here," who have gotten too angry, because they usually know that they have crossed a line. Other questions? Yes.
When you go up there in May, do you bring all your supplies for the season with you ahead of time, or do you leave the parks?
No, I do. Because I'm a dad, and because I am a writer, I spend 3.5 days on. So I go up on a Friday night. Lily and I will go up on Friday night, and I'll be on duty Saturday, Sunday, Monday, 3 11s, and then Tuesday a 7. So until usually about 2 in the afternoon. And then I'm off. And then, so I go back and forth a lot. Lots and lots of driving on the highway from Bangor to Millinocket. Yep. But it's kind of the best of both worlds in some ways. I mean, you get to get away and let your head relax and do your laundry. And I talk to editors and talk to folks that I'm doing work for, and then I take it all back into the park. And it's kind of neat. When I'm in the park, I'm often thinking of my kids or other things going on. And when I'm not working, one of the things I mentioned in my book is I always am thinking, "Boy, I wonder what's going on at the park. I wish I was up at the park." So it's kind of I'm saying in the park, I wonder how many people really just kind of long for their job when they're not there. So it's kind of nice that way.
And one other question,
Yeah.
Are these books published by Down East Magazine?
No, this particular book is a Down East book. It's about Theodore Roosevelt and his friendship with a Maine guide and sort of the mentor relationship that they had. But these are these two are Globe Pequot, and this is Roman and Littlefield. No, I'm sorry, this is AMC books. So, no, I mean, I still will write the occasional piece, but I'm still on the masthead, I believe, but I don't do too much anymore. Other questions? Yeah.
Do you have any advice regarding gear for winter hiking in the park?
A lot. I mean, I'm sure you probably know what we typically do is we'll have folks will bring. A lot of folks will make their own sleds. You know, so you're going to ski or snowshoe in. So a lot of folks will rig up a harness out of PVC to a Paris sled, plastic sled. Sometimes they'll use those big, long, kind of toboggan-y plastic toboggan totes that you can get at like a hardware store. And you definitely want a cold weather sleeping bag that goes pretty much everywhere you go for safety reasons. But then it's all personal preference. I mean, it's the same. You want to, it's all the standard base layer, a fleece of some sort, and then a heavier fleece of some sort, or wool, or and then some sort of shell that is water resistant. I mean, it's all pretty usual. We don't, other than the fact that the park it does allow snowmobiling, but only through the gut of the park. And most of the places you would want to camp are not roadside. There are a couple, but not most of them are not. So you're going to end up on snowshoes or skis. So that's the big thing to think about. Everything's going to be what you can carry or haul, human powered. Yeah.
I have a related question from the Zoom.
Yes.
Bob asks, what are some of your favorite accessible winter places in the park?
Well, everywhere in the park is spectacular in the wintertime. And just about everywhere in the park is pretty accessible. But I mean, for me, the neat thing about the winter is obviously there's fewer people. So probably my favorite place, even though it's kind of no big secret, is Chimney. I mean, Chimney Pond is just unbelievable in the wintertime because it's a 1,000-foot wall of granite that wraps all the way around you and is covered in ice and snow, and it's just spectacular. And the nice thing about Chimney that time of year is there's just fewer people than there would be in the summertime. So that would be Basin Ponds. Chimney would be favorite places. South Branch Pond is spectacular any time of year, but it's particularly spectacular in the wintertime. That would be another favorite place. Katahdin Lake is spectacular in the wintertime. Russell Pond is spectacular. I mean, it's a pretty beautiful place. It's hard to go wrong any which way.
Can you summit Katahdin?
Yes, yes.
Did you have to be experienced or?
When I started at the park, we had a rule that you had to have a 4-person party. And of those 4 people, you had to have at least 1 or 2 who had experience. We've sort of softened those rules. We had a chief ranger who came along, and he said, if you want to come in by yourself and die, you can. So you don't have to be as experienced anymore. If you're going to do ice climbing, the rangers at Chimney will go over your gear with you. If you're going to do ascents, usually a ranger will go over your gear with you, but we have people routinely come in that are not super experienced, just to poke around, have fun.
Able to ice climb and that sort of thing to get up there?
No. I have only climbed once in the wintertime, and I don't have a whole lot of mountaineering experience. And it was crampons and an ice axe. We did not rope up. We just crampons and an ice axe and Cathedral. Yeah, which is pretty common route. Saddle, Cathedral would probably be the 2 most common. Sometimes folks will go up the AWOL trail as well. But the nice thing about going up on the east side is you can use Chimney as a base. So you go in, take a day to get to Roaring Brook, and then a day to get up to Chimney, and then you pick the best day to climb from there, and you're already halfway up. So that's a good way to do it. It would be all in one day. Yeah, which is doable, but it is a lot of work. Yeah, can be fast coming down. Yes.
What's your favorite place in the summertime?
That's really a tough one. Yeah, it's really hard. I really, really love the Howe Brook Trail out of South Branch Ponds. It's a bunch of kettle ponds on Howe Brook, some of which are deep enough that you can jump off, um, not cliffs, but little rock promontories and get very cold very fast. So I love that spot. Another place is the Overlook at Russell Pond is one of my favorite spots. Blueberry Knoll up near Chimney off down below Hamlin is a favorite spot. And of course, I mean, Daisy Pond, I have a very big soft spot for. Lily Pad Pond is a favorite spot of mine, which is right out the door from Daisy. You can cross on the side of Hunk Stream and go down to Lily Pad Pond, which is really pretty. So there's just endless beautiful spots. That's one of the things that we have a lot of folks that will show up and just with a sole intention of climbing Katahdin. And I don't know, I feel a little bit bad. We have so much great stuff. I always say to people say, what's your favorite trail? And I'll be like, Double Top, because they're not Katahdin. No, because when you're on top of Double Top, you get the best look of Katahdin that you're ever going to see in your whole entire life. And it's just off the charts. So I do love climbing Katahdin, but I also love climbing so many others. And I think you really can't beat the view from top of Double Top. Questions? Yes.
20 seasons, do you have a singular favorite experience story?
I don't think I do. I mean, part of the appeal has been just being there. I mean, waking up every morning. I've gotten to do some really neat things. I mean, fighting forest fires is very exciting. Doing helicopter rescues is very exciting. I was trying to think of any particular rescues that were where you, I mean, there's a lot where you feel really, really great when you're down. It's more just overall being a park ranger. I mean, there's been a lot of wacky stuff that's happened that's kind of interesting, but in terms of a favorite experience, I don't know if I could pick just one. Yeah. Yes.
Is Katahdin a safer mountain weather-wise than, say, Mount Washington?
I mean, I think statistically, yes, but I don't. We have so many people that climb Katahdin that say it's so much harder than Mount Washington. But as far as weather goes, probably statistically, yes. They're very similar though. And the thing about Katahdin is that it's more remote than Mount Washington. Obviously there's no road up it. So, and rescue is very tricky. Not to say that anybody has an easy time over in the whites, but they're similar in many ways. But we do get a lot of people who find this much harder, which is gratifying. Yes.
I recently read the book about Kate Matrasova that
Yes.
passed away
In the whites, yeah.
And then recently a young lady just lost her life in
She did, yeah.
And just what are your thoughts as a ranger working out there? What do you guys think? Like, where's your camp? You roll your eyes and go, there goes another one, or is it?
I mean,
There are different cases.
they're all different, and we have people who are. I mean, Kate Matrasova, in many ways, I mean, she made some dumb decisions, but she was a pretty experienced person. And we had a guy who died, I want to say 3 years ago, on Knife Edge, who was a very experienced climber and made some stupid decisions. So you have, and then you have people who are very experienced who just by no fault of their own, just end up twisting their ankle, breaking their leg. We do see a lot of people you do scratch your head sometimes and just go, oh my God, what were you thinking? We often have folks who it takes 8 to 10 hours for the average person. And we'll see headlamps routinely at 11, 12 o'clock at night coming down the mountain. And I had one party that it was a super windy day. And I remember saying, I don't recommend going across Knife Edge. Okay. They went up, they went across Knife Edge. They got halfway across and they were petrified and it was wicked slow going. And they ended up spending the night up there. And the lady said, well, the ranger at Chimney told us they could see our headlamps. And I said, yeah, well, they probably could. And she said, well, why didn't they come up after us? And I said, well, it's not our job to go up after you. We told you, don't go do it. And you went and did it. And we have, our protocol is, if we know there's an injury, we'll go. If we have very, very young people or very, very old people, or if we are seeing weather that's kind of iffy, under those circumstances, we'll go. Otherwise, you sit down, wait till light comes up, and then you walk yourself down. So in that case, those folks spent the night on Knife Edge, and then they came down the next day, and they were not happy that nobody went up after them. But so, and I remember another particular case where there was a woman who had a water bottle about the size of the one I have over there, and I was at Katahdin Stream at the time, and oftentimes in the mornings we stand out in the parking lot and talk to folks and see how they're doing and see what kind of gear they have, any questions, anything like that, as they're heading on their way up the mountain. This particular lady had a water bottle like that, and it's going to be something like 86 degrees and humid. And I said, man, did you bring any more water than that? And she just gave me this look like, what do you know about me and my body? And I'm like, okay. And so we do see dehydration cases and things like that. And sometimes you just wonder what people are thinking. So there are moments when you roll your eyes, but again, incidents happen to everybody. So, I mean, we see people that I write about in the book one particular case where we had a northbound AT hiker who triggered his PLB, his personal locator beacon. And so I was concerned. I have this ranger who's a supervisor and one of my best buddies, and he's like, he'll be fine. He's okay. Don't worry about him. And I'm like, well, probably we should go. And he requested assistance, which is one of the reasons why we end up going. His PLB was triggered, is picked up by the Air Force. The Air Force calls the state police. The state police calls the chief ranger of Baxter Park. Chief ranger calls my supervisor, who talks to me, and up we go. Me and another ranger went up, and we spent the whole night looking for this guy. Literally, I think we left at about 9 p.m. We never found him. It was, in the book, I mentioned that the ranger that was with me, looked like a Jacques Cousteau special. It looked like she was a diver ahead of me on the mountain, because it was so thick, the fog, and the way her headlamp was refracting, it just looked like she was diving. And we would do this. We lost the trail so many times, and we would do this thing where we'd stand on a blaze and the other one would go looking for the next blaze, and we just do this hopscotch up the mountain because it was so thick you couldn't see anything. And we have this gigantic whistle that sounds like a freight train, and we blew our whistle and we spent all night. At 2 or 3 in the morning, my supervisor called up and said, you guys got to come down, it's not safe. So we said, okay, but we're going to look on our way down. And he said, okay, but get yourself down now. And so we turned around reluctantly, because we hadn't found the guy, and made our way down the mountain. And we get back down to Katahdin Stream Campground at like 7 or 8 in the morning, and they told us to both go get some rest, because we're probably going to need you in the afternoon to go search. So all night long, Justine, a roommaker, who was the other ranger, and I were on the mountain. We had my supervisor, who was at Katahdin Stream, with radio communication, so he's checking in every 45 minutes with us. You guys okay? What's going on? You guys okay? And then he's communicating everything to the chief ranger, who's out of Millinocket, because that's where he can get phone service. So he's got his radio, and then he's got his phone. He's talking to the state police and the Air Force to get updated coordinates from this guy's personal locator beacon. And so, in other words, it's a production. And the chief, at about 6 in the morning, starts calling all the search and rescue teams in the state, scrambling teams, saying, we're going to need you guys today. We're going to need you guys today. Start getting your folks ready. So at 10 a.m., the guy that we were all looking for comes wandering down the trail, and a couple of rangers who were searching for him find him, and they talk to him. He said that he wandered off the trail, and he pushed his PLB because he got a little scared and wanted somebody to show him where the trail went. I'm like, what, are we supposed to open a door and walk out from the side of the mountain and say, oh, it's over there? And it was a night like I was describing. So he just thought, it's harmless, I'll just ask for some help. But by doing so, he sets all that stuff in motion. So there are things like that happen that you're just like, on the one hand, you want him to be safe. On the other hand, I just thought, what are you doing? What are you thinking? Where's a ranger going to come from to tell you how to get back on the trail? Anyway, so we see all types, and sometimes we are like not happy. But it's fun adventure at 3 in the morning when we got to the point where Justine would be standing where you are, and I couldn't see her headlamp because it was that thick.
What time of year was this?
October. Yeah, and it was, if you stopped your pants, you'd see these tentacles of ice start to form on your pants. So that was I talk about that one just as a sort of cautionary tale, like think before you do these things about, and we have signs about a mile up on all of the trails that say on the mountain that say your rescue is your own responsibility. Your job is to get yourself back down. It's not our job, it's your job. So think about that and think about what you're getting into before you head up. Make sure you have everything you need. You feel comfortable with 8 to 10 hours of hiking, all that kind of stuff.
Did he have a sleeping bag or anything?
He did. He tucked himself. He made it to the top, tucked himself down over an edge. It was funny because the coordinates we were originally given put him in Witherly Ravine, which we're both like looking like this, thinking, I hope he's not down there. But it turned out he was on the opposite side of the mountain, and he just found a little knoll and tucked himself into. He had a tent and he had a sleeping bag. One of the things, so he started up at 1 in the afternoon. Well, in October, when we know that the sun's going to be going down by 4:30, 5 o'clock. And so he was told at, I believe, the visitor center or at the gate, not a good idea to go today. And we all could see what the weather was coming in. Not a good idea to go today. And then when he got to Katahdin Stream, he was told not a good idea to go today, A, and B, you shouldn't bring a full pack up the mountain. We have little day use packs that we give to AT hikers so they can take whatever they need out of their main pack and put it in the day use pack. So they have a much lighter load to climb the mountain. And we don't recommend full packs on the mountain just because it's heavy and tiring. But he took his pack up, and then he calls for help at, I don't remember what time it was, 6 or 7:30 at night. But he found himself a little place that was relatively protected, and then holed up for the night, and then came strolling down in the morning. And it was so windy that he just couldn't hear anything because the walls of his tent are luffing and luffing and luffing. And so we're blowing our big whistle and he couldn't hear us. So, but because he was a northbound through hiker, when you hear that a northbound through hiker, who should be about the most experienced people on a mountain, when someone calls for help, that it should be a super experienced hiker who's, by the time you've done 2,000 something miles, you should be pretty fit and pretty capable. So I was like, that sounds bad to me. But my supervisor was like, he'll be fine. Don't worry about him. I'm sure he's okay. And he was right that he was fine. But this supervisor of mine just has almost superhuman. He's been doing it long enough that he can tell you exactly where people are going to be located. I'm sure he sat down right there. If you're going up, go look right there. And it's uncanny how often he's right. They're going to be in the outhouse at Katahdin Stream Falls. They're in the outhouse at Katahdin. Yeah. Hold up, spent the night hiding in the outhouse in Katahdin Stream Falls. But there's just certain patterns that you see over the years. And it's funny we had this incident this year where a newbie, a probie ranger calls and says, 5-4, we all have unit numbers. 5-4, something just fell out of the sky. It looks like a piece of meat. And he's like, oh, okay, I know what that is. And they had been throwing meat with, it was for rabies. So some sort of vaccination material in the meat, dropping it in the park for animals to combat rabies. But it was a big chunk of meat that just came out of the sky. It says vaccination right on it. But this ranger is like, oh, I know what that is. But none of us knew what that was going to be, but he knew what it was going to be. It was just funny. Yeah. Any other? Yes.
Do they put out salt licks or anything for the ticks?
No.
You can't do anything to save the moose.
No. Unfortunately, because of our wilderness mandate, we don't do a lot of intervention type stuff.
The other parks?
I don't know about that. But it's horrible. They're called winter ticks, and they have no use for humans, which is nice.
Because it doesn't get cold enough.
Well, that's right. They've been able to migrate north in large numbers, and it's pretty sad. Yeah. Other questions? All right. Well, I have books over there. If anybody is interested, I'd be happy to sign.
Fascinating, thank you.